Some young men set up the conservative Washington Times in order to support Republicans who tend to lean heavily towards supporting religious freedoms, even when religion crosses a line against the Constitution. Since Moon's cult lives on the other side of that line, he needed to find a way to be an asset to Republicans in case he ever needed them to come to his rescue. He previously tried to donate buckets of money to them the same way everyone else does who wants to buy them off, but being a cult leader, his money was refused. Unlike other major newspapers that cover Washington politics, the Washington Times doesn't answer to the board of directors, who also own interest in much of the other wealth this country has. Being that he's nothing more than a delusional cult leader, there was no chance of his newspaper being initiated into the secrets of how to cover news in Washington, D.C. In Washington, there's a discreet party circuit that spends millions of dollars every night treating our elected officials like royalty. That's why when you send an honest man or woman here, it doesn't take long for them to turn into scumbags. When you elect them for the first time, you usually make the right choice, as they were likely well-intentioned at the time. But after a few months of running around this cesspool of a city, their resolve weakens and they make mistakes. Before they know what hit them, they aren't yours anymore. They're owned by whoever caught them, like big fish in a big net. Reporters are the same way. Washington Times reporters, however, aren't the same as other reporters. Look at James Traficant, a Democrat congressman from Ohio who couldn't be bought or silenced. He was just released from prison a few months ago after serving 7 years for the most ridiculous set of charges ever to come out of that city. That's what happens in Washington if you row against the tide. But long before that happened, everyone learned to shut up when he entered the party. The same is true, or was true, for the Washington Times reporters. So back in the day, they had no idea they were publishing stories that Republicans actually didn't want them talking about. I was only reading the Times because I lived where the paper was delivered daily. It only had a smart circulation at the time, so few Americans had access to their articles, while still fewer actually read the ones I did. I, however, made a point to follow up with my own research on keeping track of the disturbing stories they were telling. I would read the Washington Times and Washington Post every day, while knowing stories that weren't in the Post were the ones that you would never get a chance to hear about unless I tell you about them, which is what I'm doing. Take, for instance, this story in the Washington Times about an additive to gasoline that gives all these miraculous seeming benefits that the oil companies refuse to use, while no one in Washington has the stones to force them to because they don't see it as their job. They see their job as hiding the fact that this additive exists because the oil companies help grease the wheels of the nightlife in our nation's capital. A few years ago, I was challenged to prove the existence of this additive, so I went looking for the company that held the patent on it. I didn't think it mattered since the EPA claims there's no additive or any other way to make gasoline or diesel fuel more efficient than it already is, so proving them wrong wouldn't do much good since they already know they're wrong because they're lying about it. If the government says something doesn't work, even though it doesn't stand much of a chance of getting the market, especially if the oil companies aren't going to use it unless the government forces them to. But I went looking for it anyway to prove that I knew what I was talking about. What I found was astonishing. It turned out that the state of Texas, the same state whose oil companies refuse to use or even acknowledge that this additive exists, are using it in their municipal truck fleets to lessen diesel engine emissions to aid in their complying with federal air quality standards. They've even tested and confirmed that it works, although they don't mention anything about how it saves mileage. But if you go to the website of the company that sells it to them, the claim about mileage is talked about in great detail throughout the site. California also tested and approved it. In researching the topic, I came across a chat forum whose patrons had been adding it to their personal gasoline. They claimed to have found that rather than purchasing the additive itself, which is very expensive, that there's a cheap smokeless 2-cycle engine oil additive that's the same chemical as the additive being used in Texas. It's called Torco GP7. They have even worked out the amount needed to be added to gasoline, slightly less than 2 drops per gallon, by finding the patent on the original product now sold under the name of Viscom. They had simply adjusted the amount according to the original specifications. So I got some and tried it. Indeed it works just as claimed. The key to understanding how Washington works is the fact that this additive was discovered under a government contract. That's how word got around that led to the Washington Times article. Our government owned the rights to this additive and could have told the oil companies to give us cleaner and more efficient fuel, which by law they had to do. But the oil companies didn't want anything to do with it, so the story went away as if it never existed. Can you imagine the fireworks if this story reached mainstream America? Let me make sure I'm being clear here. For pennies per tank of fuel, the world can have 20% more mileage from fossil fuels with 70% less pollution, while the government and oil companies have known about this for over 20 years and are still lying to us about it now. That's just one little story I've kept track of from the 1990s. There are many more. But just that one could get new party of outlaw candidates elected to go to Washington to see to it that this kind of thing never happens again. Of course, outlaws won't have to go to Washington to force the oil companies to use this additive. be forced to by you simply knowing the truth about it. Or really the deeper truth about how this additive is refined from crude oil, just like gasoline and diesel fuel is. In fact, the shorter molecular form of it is already being used in gasoline. So actually, after a few tweaks of the existing refining process, we could be getting these better quality fossil fuels for the same price being paid to produce it now. Washington is where good things go to be killed, hid from the American people, replaced with bad ones. But once the truth about it is out in the open where all Americans can see it, it's free from our government's chains where it doesn't need the government's help to be added to gasoline. That's something consumer demand can do on its own. But since Democrats and Republicans would no longer be electable if these kinds of covered-up stories started to surface, the only ones worthy of public trust would be outlaws. So now I've gotten you past simply wearing anything other than suits and ties and closer to ideas that have electable teeth in them. The next thing we need to cover is how to get the word out that we have a plan. I have two methods that'll work in most places just as well as it will work here. They're both simple and cheap while don't involve a lot of handshaking, speech giving, or baby kissing. You can do all that if you want, but you can get started on a much cheaper and simpler foundation. I like these ideas because they don't involve groveling for money. I like the idea of beating my big spending rivals with little money, pocket change. If, however, a big pile of it's forced on me, I'm going to give it away to people who need it rather than buy posters of myself to litter the local roads with. I figure this will not only send that money where it can best be used, but once the news media finds out about what I'm doing, they'll be all over. My opponents will probably find a way to show how what I'm doing is illegal, which will probably wind up being great for the campaign. I mean, think about all the good that can be done with the hundreds of billions spent on campaigns that could be used for something constructive while forcing wannabe elected officials to prove they know how to get things done. One of these tactics is an undervalued asset in community communications that's widely misunderstood. Public access TV is accessible in many places around the country, although not everywhere. Here in Fairfax County, I pay $26 a year to be a member and can produce pretty much any TV show I want. I have my old shows posted at thelortonshow.com. They used to air right next to other cable TV and Fios TV stations. Since most public access TV shows cater to niche audiences through amateur productions, they aren't watched by a lot of people, unless of course a lot of people come there to watch them, which is what I intend to see happen. This video will air on public TV in the future along with others that support my campaign. Other outlaw candidates will be able to easily follow my lead because I'm going to post the scripts for my videos on this website and at BobbyFontaine.com so you can use the content any way you wish to make your own videos. I'll even go as far as sending you copies so you can use my videos in your campaign while asking that you do the same for others with yours. Then there's a matter of how to get people to watch the TV show and come to the website to see the other videos. This one is brilliant. I wish I'd have thought of it myself, but knowing about it is good enough. I was at a gas station a year or so ago when I saw what I thought was a $100 bill folded up sitting on top of the gas pump. So I looked around to see if the person who lost it was still around so I could give it back to them. But when I picked it up, I found it wasn't a $100 bill at all, but an advertisement flyer. What the producer of it had done was copy the ends of a $100 bill, then printed them connected to each other. So when it was folded in half, it looked like a $100 bill. But when I opened it up, I saw the advertisement. What happened next was what's important. I didn't toss it in the trash, no way. I wanted to use it to fool someone else the same way I'd been fooled. I did it and my friend quickly brought it back to me thinking I had lost it. He didn't even recognize that it wasn't real. Then my roommate took it to work where it was stolen. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if it's still out there floating around being pocketed by some and returned by others. The experience taught me that this would be a cheap and highly effective campaign tool, especially to advertise something like a rogue candidate running for Congress for something called the New Party of Outlaws, a non-political party that plans to finish the revolution our forefathers started by advancing the United States to the next level of freedom before the Chinese figured out first. Once I get clearance from the Secret Service on how to legally produce these flyers and get the plates ready for printing, I'll provide them here for you to use as well. That's pretty much it for the big picture. The rest is in the details of the websites of the candidates in the links below.